The MCU has no shortage of divisive movies. There are those who feel that Black Panther was a cultural milestone, and those who believe it to be a blight on society. There are those who adore Spider-Man Homecoming, and those who feel that while it was a good movie, its depiction of Spider-Man was deeply flawed. Some people feel that Thor Ragnarok went too far with reinventing its main character, and some people feel that Captain Marvel should be played by an autistic, obese black lesbian, or anyone other than Brie Larson. Point being that the MCU is filled with movies capable of setting the fan base against itself. And no entry in the MCU is as schismatic as Iron Man 3. Now, you might be taken back by such a claim. After all, if you've watched some of my other videos, you'd be led to believe that Black Panther or Captain Marvel are the most divisive things in the MCU. Captain Marvel and Black Panther are obviously controversial films in their own rights. But while Black Panther and Captain Marvel are both divisive and controversial, they are only divisive and controversial to the extent to which external factors are discussed in conjunction with the actual movies. Black Panther and Captain Marvel are controversial because of their incorporation of political trends in their respective writing. These movies are heavily discussed largely because of ideas and qualities that originated outside the scope of the narratives themselves. Identity politics and intersectionality precedes the release of both Black Panther and Captain Marvel. Thus, I would argue that Iron Man 3 is definitively the most divisive movie in the MCU by virtue of what it brings to the table within the scope of its own story. And I know I said that I'd like to critique Thor: The Dark World and Ant-Man and the Wasp at some point, but it's so much more fun to criticize a movie that a decent amount of people are actually defending. Enough people trash talk The Incredible Hulk on a regular basis that there's not much argument to be had. It's low-hanging fruit, and 99% of people see it as just that. But a movie like Black Panther or Iron Man 3, a film that has die-hard support from people with whom I vehemently disagree, would actually be fun to criticize. So here we are. And in case you don't feel like sitting through this whole video just to hear what I have to say about Iron Man 3, then allow me to say that it's awful. Iron Man 3 is easily the worst movie in his trilogy, and it almost completely ruined the MCU's flagship character. And I really don't say this lightly. Iron Man 3 is a terrible film. It wasted its potential, totally ignored world building, and undoubtedly has the most divisive plot twist in the MCU. Iron Man 3 sucks. And without further ado, here's why.
Tradition as well as capitalism. At the factory gate outside when I pull up, they get me loose, yeah.
The movie starts with a dramatic shot of Tony's Iron Man collection being destroyed with his narration dubbed over it. In the movie's single post-credit scene, we learn that all of Tony's narration during the movie took place in a de facto therapy session between himself and Bruce Banner. This is one of the weaker post-credit scenes the MCU has given us, and only serves to demean any value the audience attributed to Tony's narration. He says,
"We create our own demons."
A very on-the-nose expression of one of the film's central themes, but I'll come back to that at the end of the video for the sake of context. Tony's narration takes us to a New Year's celebration in Switzerland, where he had delivered a speech and acquainted himself with Maya Hansen, a glorified botanist who will become more important to the plot later on for no reason. Tony flirts with Maya because he's interested in her work. And the other thing, she reveals that she's developing a biochemical agent capable of hacking into organisms and rewriting their DNA, known as Extremis. Mullet Happy tampers with a plant, showcasing a glitch that Maya has not yet resolved, causing the plant to explode quite spectacularly. I'd like to draw your attention to how blasé Maya is to the fact that her work, designed to benefit humanity, is currently capable of making its host spontaneously combust.
This is what I'm talking about, the glitch.
Worth noting is that at this same conference in Switzerland, Tony meets Aldrich Killian, a fellow scientist who introduces himself as a member of Advanced Idea Mechanics, or AIM for short, who is really interested in Maya's work rather than Tony's. At this point in his life, Tony is still an uber jerk, and so he baits Killian to the roof of the building they're in, only to leave him up there, alone, on New Year's Eve, to contemplate suicide. Killian looks out over all the people from that rooftop and has an absolutely nonsensical epiphany that somehow sustains him for the next 12 years until Tony comes back into the picture. More on that later. Included in Tony's narration during this prologue is
The old days. Never thought they'd come back to bite me. Why would they?
Keep in mind, this narration takes place after the events of Iron Man 1, 2, 3, and the Avengers. This narration takes place after he has had 4 full movies of development and is supposed to be Tony having a profound retrospective of what's happened to him that relates specifically to the events of Iron Man 3. But whoever wrote this line has clearly not seen Iron Man, because the opening scene depicts Tony's old days biting him damn near to death. Tony says towards the end of the prologue that on that New Year's Eve, he created demons, which is totally true and a good example of Tony taking responsibility for his past self. But he has apparently completely forgotten about the singular incident that started him off on his path to becoming Iron Man. A missile of his own creation detonating near him, launching shrapnel into his chest that requires an electromagnet to keep at bay. One could argue that this is the best example of Tony's old, significantly different self coming back to bite him. At one point in his life, Tony was irresponsible, reckless, and ego-driven. In all fairness, these qualities didn't really go away, they just diminished as his character grew. But Tony's old days came back to bite him the moment his carelessness put dangerous weaponry in Obadiah Stane's hands, leading him to get blown half to death. To take this further, you could even argue that the missile that almost kills Tony is a figurative demon of his own creation coming back to bite him. This moment was essential in the creation of Iron Man, and yet Tony either doesn't remember it happening, or the writers didn't feel it was a worthy inclusion in the list of things from Tony's past coming back to bite him. Also, Yinsen is here. Remember when he said he met Tony before in the cave? Remember that? Here it is. Yinsen meets Tony and Tony takes no notice of him. Just how he says it happened in the cave. Remember when Yinsen said that in Iron Man? That movie that's better than this one? It's an Easter egg, get it? Tony's narration leads us smoothly into the present day as he says,
These days I'm a changed man.
Extremely true, as Tony has gone through a major redemption arc over the past 3 movies. From Iron Man 1 to the Avengers, Tony has proven that he is good-hearted, strong-willed, and self-sacrificing. Over his past 3 appearances, Tony's character has grown and developed, and we've been taken along for the ride. How will Iron Man 3 build upon this solid foundation? We'll just have to wait and see. In the present day, set right around Christmas after the Battle of New York, Tony is working on his Mark 42 autonomous prehensile propulsion suit. Micro-implants under Tony's skin allow individual segments of this suit to track and attach themselves to his body. This is undoubtedly the most creative and unique Iron Man suit in the entire MCU. There are endless possibilities as to how the plot could play around the concept of a suit that can disassemble itself and reform around Tony's body. To the movie's credit, it does play around this idea in select scenes, but for the most part, it's wasted potential within the MCU. This autonomous prehensile suit tech makes a return for a single scene in Age of Ultron, and then never again. The concept of a suit forming itself around Tony comes into play many times later in the MCU, but what I'm talking about is the Mark 42's brand of individually propelled suit pieces specifically. Iron Man 3 reveals this incredible concept to the audience, has its fun with it, and then the MCU ditches it only for us to find out in Infinity War that Tony has now mastered nanotech, which he in all likelihood stole from Wakanda. In all fairness, this is a critique of Iron Man 3, not Iron Man within the context of the MCU as a whole. My point is simply that, with a concept as unique and imaginative as a prehensile suit, the MCU does not use it to its full potential. But for the time that it is allowed to strut its stuff in Iron Man 3, the Mark 42 is glorious. Worth mentioning is that this is just the prototype prehensile suit. Tony has not yet worked out all the kinks in the tech, but will have the concept perfected by the time Age of Ultron rolls around approximately 2 years later in universe. It is satisfying to see that our main character is fallible. Tony's had 3 movies of development, but he is still capable of making mistakes. This could be contrasted, for example, with a hypothetical character who gets everything right on their first try and makes their debut appearance as a perfect, infallible, non-emotive machine. No specific character comes to mind, but where were we?
Then I had to go and turn on the TV.
The Mandarin is introduced as a powerful, intimidating, and truly evil force within the MCU. It lasts a solid half of the movie, but it was a good ride while it lasted. In his introductory scene, which takes the form of a broadcast hijacking, the Mandarin threatens US President Ellis. Where is S.H.I.E.L.D. or Captain America now that foreign powers have threatened America's sovereignty? This is just one example of how a character existing in a shared universe raises questions of what the other characters in the same universe are doing at any given time. Hulk and Thor can be excused fairly easily. Thor's probably doing battle in some other realm, and Bruce is likely trying to lay low and enjoy some R&R, even though we know Tony's capable of contacting him. But characters like Cap, Hawkeye, and Black Widow cannot be so easily excused. It's unclear to the audience what any of these 3 characters are doing at the time of Iron Man 3, but the Winter Soldier establishes, barely a year after Iron Man 3, that Cap and Widow are active agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. They work abroad doing missions for Nick Fury, and so it is easy to infer that by the time Winter Soldier begins, Steve and Nat have done a great deal of missions together, having become proficient teammates, although they still have trust issues. Surely a terrorist on the scale of the Mandarin would warrant some concern from S.H.I.E.L.D. At the least, they'd put some effort into monitoring the Mandarin, but we get no indication of that. All this lack of inclusion of resources from the greater MCU in Iron Man 3 serves to tell us that the Mandarin isn't actually a threat, which turns out to be true. But if S.H.I.E.L.D. knew that the Mandarin wasn't a threat and didn't put any effort into stopping him, then why did they let the US government put so much effort into arming itself against him? Well, maybe it's because S.H.I.E.L.D. knew that while the Mandarin wasn't a threat, his support from AIM was a true threat, and so they let the Americans go on believing that the Mandarin was a threat, so that they would be better prepared against AIM, but then why didn't S.H.I.E.L.D. put any effort into monitoring or stopping AIM? And we could go on forever like this, but I like to think that S.H.I.E.L.D. knew exactly what was going on with the Mandarin and didn't tell anyone below their ranks for not wanting to intervene, kinda like a Watcher situation. And for the entire duration of Iron Man 3, Tony was one phone call away from knowing the truth, because Nick Fury wouldn't lie to Tony like that, but Tony just didn't have the foresight to even consider using any outside resources to help him out. That's just my headcanon, though. But Lumo, there is another character who's been made responsible for protecting the President from the Mandarin threat. Oh yeah, Rhodey. That guy who has, at this point, only ever showed up alongside Iron Man in Iron Man movies. Geez, it's good to see this extended universe character be given a meaningful purpose which he totally fulfills. Since the Mandarin made himself known, the American government has rebranded War Machine as Iron Patriot. A significant departure from the source material and a totally wasted concept. Tony politely inquires as to what's really going on with the Mandarin, and after a whole 2 seconds of contemplation, Rhodey divulges classified information to what is potentially a major security risk. Tony Stark has a reputation for being reckless and irresponsible. Rhodey is his best friend, but is well known for being the more responsible and disciplined of the two. Either Rhodey is incredibly desperate to share this info with someone, or the plot needs Tony to find out that there have been 9 Mandarin bombings, and this is the most convenient vehicle for it. Tony offers his help with the Mandarin and mentions that he has developed bomb disposal tech that catches explosions mid-air. This is a very interesting line. We're only 10 minutes into the movie, and already the viewer's being told about tech that does not come into play immediately as it is mentioned. Remember how in Bond films, Q would introduce and explain gadgets such as laser pens or cufflink grenades, only for those same gadgets to come in handy in a precarious situation much later on in the film? Similarly, how Shuri introduced sound-absorbing shoes to T'Challa early on in Black Panther, only for them to be used later. Wait. The point I'm trying to make is that why spend any amount of script mentioning a gadget that has no place later in the movie? Tony has made a device capable of catching explosions midair, and explicitly mentions having the technology right around the time that explosive enemies come into play, but the tech never appears. But Lumo, Tony's house and lab get destroyed before he has the chance to use the bomb disposal tech. But viewer, Tony has the ability to call in his Iron Army for the climax. But Lumo, that's because they were stored safely in the cellar. But viewer, the writers can write whatever the hell they want. They wrote in a line about bomb disposal tech in the same movie as villains capable of exploding and did nothing with the concept. This is a nitpick though.
Do you mind signing my drawing?
Stopping the Mandarin is priority, but it's not superhero business. No, it's not, quite frankly. It's American business.
Mandarin is not superhero business, but American business. Is that it? Is that this movie's entire justification for why the Avengers or S.H.I.E.L.D. won't intervene in the Mandarin business? This is the writer's sloppy way of telling us, directly, look, one character within the universe said a thing, so it must be true, even if it defies in-universe logic. This line is literally there so that if anyone asks, where were the Avengers during all this? Some diehard stan can reply, don't you remember? Rhodey said that the Mandarin is not superhero business. This is lazy, but I shouldn't harp on about it for too long because it's only downhill from here. As Tony's signing a child's fan art, Rhodey reminds him of the Battle of New York. The drawing he's signing is of Iron Man in that same battle. One of the kids then asks Tony how he got out of the wormhole, and he has a severe anxiety attack. Tony is suffering from PTSD after the events of the Avengers. This is a natural character progression and only serves to further humanize and ground Tony in reality. That would be the case if the movie handled his trauma with any amount of taste, but instead he's made into a bumbling trauma victim who's no more than a few words away from a breakdown at any given point. Breakdowns which are played for lighthearted humor, but more on that later. Pepper has filled the shoes of Stark Industries CEO nicely, and Happy has become head of security. Their dialogue makes for enjoyable comedic relief that feels natural. Pepper meets Aldrich Killian for the first time in years and is visibly awestruck by his physical transformation, just as we the viewers are. The last we saw of him, he was meek and unattractive. Killian, 12 years later, is charismatic and in good shape. Killian's charm in this scene and Happy's noticeable distrust of him are the most obvious pieces of foreshadowing we get that he is an antagonist.
After years dodging the president's ban on immoral biotech research
should raise so many red flags. He also somehow has access to the room's lighting, even more red flags. Killian invokes Extremis as an idea of Ames, rather than that of Maya Hansen's directly. If you're paying attention, which you'd be forgiven for not doing, then you'd remember that Extremis was Maya's idea, or at the very least, she named it. And for Killian to be claiming that its property of aim means that Maya either brokered a deal with them or they stole her research. Killian explains that because the human brain has an empty slot, it is therefore destined to be upgraded, and goes on to explain Extremis in the same way Maya did, a program capable of hacking into the hard drive/operating system of any living organism and recoding its DNA. Thankfully, Pepper is smart enough to worry about how Extremis is potentially weaponizable. Tony apparently never pays attention to Pepper, or anything beyond his own work, but just so happens to ask Happy for a status report at the same time Killian is back in town.
This woman's the best thing that ever happened to you, and you're just ignoring her.
Can you spell convenient? Tony and Pepper have been together for quite some time now. Pepper comes home on date night to find that Tony won't even entertain her in person. Tony opens up to Pepper about how insignificant and out of place he feels now that gods and aliens are a reality. He reveals that she has been keeping him afloat, just barely, and that he can't sleep. Tony says that his suits are a part of him, but Pepper feels that they are just a distraction. Tony reveals that his intentions are to keep Pepper safe because he can't live without her. More on that later. Tony's PTSD reaches a peak that same night as a trauma-induced night terror results in the Mark 42 harassing Pepper. This is probably one of the movie's greatest merits, of which there aren't many. In this single scene, the movie excellently combines two of its most important factors to develop Tony's character in a meaningful way. The Mark 42 is neurally connected to Tony, and he is currently suffering from bouts of PTSD-induced anxiety. So the suit reacts as if it's trying to defend him. That's what it looks like, at least. It isn't entirely clear what's happening in this scene, but that's okay. This scene works without having to explain exactly what's going on. The impact and shock that this scene has on the audience is palpable enough that Tony saying that there's some faulty wiring is plenty enough for us to grasp what's happening. This is an example of how PTSD is affecting Tony as a result of his time as Iron Man. The entire scene is something that could literally only happen to Iron Man. By being unique and creative, this scene gives us a glimpse into a new area of Tony's life and psyche, and is only further evidence of how great of a concept a semi-autonomous suit is. Iron Man 3 had such an incredible concept to work with, and this is as good as it gets. Tragic considering how poorly the rest of the movie handles Tony's trauma. Happy follows a shady character from earlier to a meeting with an Extremis rookie. Happy interferes, resulting in the rookie seemingly exploding out of distress. The shady character, who is actually an experienced Extremis soldier, asks the rookie, "Can you regulate?" To which he replies yes, but was evidently telling a non-truth. It's been 12 years since we saw Maya's plant explode, and the Extremis formula still has the glitch. It appears that they could never get rid of it, and settled for weaponizing it instead. Considering that we know where the plot goes, it's worth mentioning that Tony apparently solved the glitch in a drunken stupor the same night he hooked up with Maya, and totally forgot about it afterwards. Maya never saw the solution though, because part of it was smudged out, and she worked with Killian and AIM for 12 years, knowing that Tony could solve this life-ending glitch, but didn't contact him until the events of this movie? Let's get this straight. Happy gets blown up by the rookie, and after Tony leaves the hospital in which Happy is currently comatose, he gives up his address, for some reason, and then Maya walks right in the front door to ask for Tony's help with the formula because she believes he can help them fix Extremis in time to ship product. But it's not like Tony has been in hiding for the past decade. He's been on the cover of magazines and been working very publicly as the CEO of Stark Enterprises for most of that time. We're told that Extremis is essentially Maya's life's work, and yet over the course of 12 years, she never even considered emailing Tony about a possible collaboration. All she needs is the fucking solution to this formula that can cure death, but she just sits on her ass until Tony challenges a terrorist to a deathmatch. About that, Tony gets set off at the hospital and proceeds to do one of the most idiotic things he could have done considering what he himself told Pepper barely one day earlier. He directly challenges the Mandarin and gives him his home address. But barely 6 minutes ago, we saw Tony tell Pepper that his ultimate goal was to protect her because he can't live without her. And yet he gave the world the address of the place where Pepper lives with him. Best case scenario, the Mandarin sends a mail bomb to the house. Worst case scenario? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Tony spends all of 2 minutes being a detective and finds the earliest possible Mandarin attack, an explosion of 3,000 degrees, something that nobody else in this world has done. Tony acts as if calling for total lockdown is enough to secure his home from the Mandarin. Seriously, what is he even expecting? The Mandarin has the resources necessary to hack into public and private broadcasts to showcase his twisted public service announcements, and is best known for bombings. From this totally basic information, what does Tony expect from the Mandarin that this total lockdown protocol will defend against? Maya Hansen is back, and despite despite being on total lockdown and not having associated with this person for over a decade, Tony invites her in. Pepper openly intends to leave town as to avoid any potential danger that they may face in the wake of Tony threatening the terrorist. Tony inexplicably wants to stay put. We have to assume this is because he believes they are safest inside the house, because that is never said. At the moment that Maya shows up, Mandarin helicopters attack the house. Maya is working with AIM, who is puppeteering the Mandarin. How much miscommunication needs to take place for Maya to seek Tony's help at the same time that AIM's helicopters missile strike the house? All of the people in the house very nearly died. But don't worry, it's explained later on.
I didn't know you and the Master were gonna blow the place up.
The house is on full lockdown after Tony threatened a powerful warlord, and the suit he chooses to brandish while defending the house is a not yet combat-ready prototype. Why? We know he has at least 40 other suits in cold storage. What are they even for? Oh yeah. As the house is crumbling around Tony, he doesn't just fly away. His HUD reads, "System failure," and we just have to infer that that means it is unable to fly. And it is only after he escapes the ruins of his house underwater that his flight power is restored. Extremely inconvenient for Tony, extremely convenient for the plot. This massive inconvenience for Tony serves to lead the world to believe that he has died. More on that later. Tony passes out while the suit takes him to Tennessee. To be fair, Jarvis had set a flight plan to Tennessee, but then the house got destroyed during an attempt on Tony's life, so how his super-intelligent AI thought it was appropriate to travel to the site of the first potential Mandarin attack directly after being attacked by the Mandarin while low in resources goes beyond any logic we're accustomed to seeing Jarvis exhibit.
Stark Secure Server, now transferring to all known receivers.
We see Tony contact Pepper on a secure server telling her that he needs to see the Mandarin business through. Later on, Pepper just happens to hear a beeping coming from a helmet that she is lovingly caressing and learns that Tony is alive. That was the whole purpose of Tony sending that message on the secure frequency, that Pepper would know he's alive. Now Pepper can go on in the plot behaving as though he is alive because the plot needs that to be the case, even though it makes no significant difference. It's literally just so that Pepper can act as though Tony is alive for the sake of the narrative running smoother. Tony takes refuge in a boy named Harley's garage, and quickly they get acquainted. Tony's treatment of his suit in this scene is highly reflective of his own condition and gives us a glimpse into how he himself feels. Tony is extremely insensitive and condescending to a boy he just met. We could infer a lot about his psyche from this blunt behavior, but we don't have to, because his treatment of his suit in the same scene has made it abundantly clear to us how Tony feels. He feels vulnerable, weak, and in pain.
This is a piñata for a cricket.
Tony gives a non-lethal weapon to a child for use against another child in exchange for help when any other trade would have sufficed. The only reason that Tony gives Harley a flashbang is because he will use it against an extremist soldier when the cards are down later on. If the flashbang didn't come into use against an enhanced individual during the movie, then there would be no justification for Tony giving Harley a flashbang for the express purpose of using it against a school bully. There is no way Tony could have anticipated that it would come in handy against an extremist soldier later on, so there's absolutely no rationale present. Tony just met this kid and assumed that he was bullied rather than the bully. Harley repeatedly proves to be an emotionally manipulative little shit, but Tony trusts him with a non-lethal grenade anyway. And later on, an entire lab. On their way to a motel, Maya reveals to Pepper that she thinks her boss works for the Mandarin and that she wanted Tony's help. This is only partly true, as Maya is well aware of her and Killian's involvement in all the illegal biotech research that took place for Extremis to get where it is at this point. What is unclear is whether or not Maya is actually in the loop about the Mandarin being a front for what Killian is doing with AIM. Which makes no sense, but more on that later. Maya refers to the Mandarin as the Master, which is likely what anyone who believes the act would refer to him as, but it could just be her putting on her own act in front of Pepper. At the motel, we get a heartfelt bonding session between Pepper and Maya, which only serves to increase the impact her betrayal has on the audience. Maya's character from this point forward is an excellent example of how tonally borked this movie is. The writing and delivery of Maya as a character is so inconsistent that it is impossible to tell what purpose she is supposed to serve within the story. Let's jump ahead a bit because I don't feel like revisiting this later. Maya dies, very abruptly. In the scene where Tony wakes up captive in the mansion, Maya explains to him that she is close to having the Extremis formula stable. Tony adamantly disagrees from his own experience in the field. Maya says that she just needs his help completing the formula that he wrote down 12 years ago. I've said this before, but it bears repeating. All she needed to do was contact Stark Enterprises in any capacity and either ask Tony to complete the formula or request that Stark and AIM do some kind of collaboration on the Extremis project. She had 12 years and she didn't do it. Why? because the plot needs that to be the case. It's incredible just how stupid these characters are for the sake of the story.
You don't remember?
Tony then explains to Maya how she's basically sold her soul to the devil and she is visibly regretful, but turns away dramatically to let Killian enter anyway. As Killian threatens Tony using Pepper as a bargaining chip, which also makes no sense, but more on that later, Maya takes a turn for the better and threatens to kill herself if Killian doesn't let Tony go. This is Maya's ultimate character development, from well-meaning bioengineer to cold-hearted extortionist, back around the bend to self-sacrificial altruist. She threatens Killian by saying, "If I die, what happens to your soldiers? What happens to your product?
What happens if you go too hot?
All of these questions serve to tell the audience how important Maya is to Killian's master scheme. All these questions lead us to the logical conclusion that Killian inherently needs Maya to help finish the extremist project, or in case Killian can't regulate. But then he just nonchalantly shoots her, proving how insignificant she was this whole time. All those questions she asked about what Killian would do without her, they were irrelevant, and Maya radically overestimated her value to the project. Which begs the question, if Killian doesn't need her at this point to help him regulate or to help ship product, then when did he need her, if at all? The movie doesn't answer this question, and for all I can tell, Maya served no purpose to the narrative of Iron Man 3. All she achieved was getting Pepper captured, but that wasn't even planned, so we can chalk it up as a contrivance. All her character development amounted to Tony getting angry that she was murdered and reminding us that Killian is the big bad. Her entire plan hinged on Tony remembering a formula he wrote after a one-night stand 12 years ago. Maya Hansen is not only monumentally stupid, but easily the most pointless character in this whole movie, especially considering how important the writing makes her out to be. She's a total waste of screen time and the audience's attention. Moving on and backwards, it is revealed to the audience that Killian works closely with the Mandarin on a set which we later learn is located in Miami. We then get a scene of Harley taking Tony to the site of the first extremis explosion, which is meant to give the audience development of Tony's PTSD and their relationship. But what actually happens is some lackluster bonding and extremely awkward comedic relief as Tony's trauma is played off for chuckles. It doesn't help that Harley is given the sole purpose of inducing anxiety in Tony in this scene. Whatever was the intention of this scene is overshadowed and undermined by how annoying Harley is and by how awkwardly Tony's trauma is portrayed. As Tony walks into the bar where he plans to confront the mother of the exploded, he bumps into Extremis Soldier 2, who ends up in the same bar to confront the same woman, but doesn't enter until certain plot points have commenced and the audience has been given more context surrounding the Extremis patients. Very convenient. As Tony runs out of the bar, he sees Extremis Soldier 1, but the only possible way he could be identified is by his slight glows. Remember, Tony has not seen this character up until this point. The fight scene that follows shows us that Tony is capable and resourceful even without his hyper-advanced tech. He proves to be cunning in combat and, armed with nothing but the appliances around him, MacGyvers his way to victory over Extremis Soldier 2. Then the other soldier takes Harley captive, prompting him to use the flashbang that was only ever going to be used in this exact scene in any case. Tony finishes the fight with a DIY repulsor which he most likely made out of the parts he asked Harley to get for him. All in all, seeing Tony at work without an Iron Man armor is refreshing and proves to us that he is more than just a man in a suit. His ingenuity in the face of poor odds is a side of Tony that we only get to see in this movie. In every other appearance of his, Tony has a suit or teammates on his side that make this craftiness redundant. While it's great that Iron Man 3 shows this different side of Tony so authentically, it is tragic that the rest of this movie is so catastrophically bad.
You're welcome.
For what? Did I miss something?
Me saving your life.
If you do someone a solid, don't be a yutz, all right? Just play it cool. Otherwise, you come off grandiose.
And I want you to thank me now. Go ahead, I'm listening.
For what? Nearly blasting me into space?
Who just saved your magical ass?
During the Mandarin's third broadcast, he threatens to shoot a Roxxon executive if the president doesn't call him within 30 seconds. The Mandarin appears visibly confused when he actually hears the phone ringing. The first hint we get that he is an actor going off of a script. He likely didn't anticipate the president actually calling him, which is why he shot the Roxxon dude anyway. He ends the broadcast by declaring that there is only one lesson left and that nobody can save the president. At this point, I'd love to know what's going on in the United Nations and S.H.I.E.L.D. The events of the movie prove to us that the people capable of easily stopping the Mandarin are twiddling their thumbs, which is more a cinematic universe failing, but the movie doesn't even mention the Avengers. Iron Man 3 makes no mention of any of the forces outside of the Iron Man franchise who would potentially have a vested interest in protecting the President of the United States. S.H.I.E.L.D. is an organization that was introduced in Iron Man 1, and it is given no significant lip service. Anyway, during a phone call between Tony and Rhodey, we learn that AIM did the redesign for the Iron Patriot. This is clunky exposition to explain how AIM could infiltrate the President's inner circle and cast doubt on any shred of intelligence the MCU's president might have had. In the beginning of the movie, we're told that Killian, and by extension AIM, has spent years dodging the president's ban on immoral biotech research, and now we're told that it was AIM who redesigned the War Machine armor. So let's get this straight. The President of the United States of America was threatened by a very powerful terrorist. In response to this threat, the US government appointed James Rhodes, the War Machine, as the President's bodyguard. And because focus groups prefer the name Iron Patriot, the same government commissioned AIM to do the rebrand. The US government hired AIM, while apparently not digging deep enough to uncover the fact that AIM was doing unethical biological research on human test subjects. They were so careless that they didn't realize that the same organization they hired to pimp their super bodyguard is run by a man doing illegal work who is simultaneously orchestrating every broadcast and attack allegedly carried out by the Mandarin, the one who was threatening their president in the first place. Holy shit. Everyone in this movie is retarded. This is the American government we're talking about. The country of the NSA and CIA, and with all the resources at their disposal, they couldn't smell a rat right under their noses. We later learn that the vice president is actually in cahoots with AIM. One would assume that this is because he hopes that the extremis serum can help heal his crippled daughter. So it is possible that the Veep helped cover up AIM's dirty dealings and facilitated their work with the War Machine revamp. But the movie never says that, so this is as far as my benefit of the doubt extends. The plot of Iron Man 3 makes so little sense that I'm not willing to do any more writing for the writers. Even if the Veep's business with AIM answers all the questions I asked earlier, it is nevertheless a disgrace that the American government would let a security breach go so far, and a disgrace to any film that is entertaining and logically consistent at the same time. Tony meets a superfan of his who helps him hack into AIM files, whereafter he learns how the project started out.
Addiction will not be tolerated, and those who cannot regulate will be cut from the program.
Tony continues to use Harley's help instead of calling literally any Avenger or Nick Fury. The suit's power source comes into question, prompting Tony to
just build something.
We now get to see the extent of Tony's resourcefulness and ingenuity one last time before he gets his armor back. Tony MacGyvers his way into the Mandarin's lair and discovers he is a fake. This is the plot twist that has the fanbase divided down the middle. More on that later. For now, let's skip everything to do with Maya in this scene because I already covered her. Tony gets captured and Killian enters the scene to deliver a villainous monologue. Remember how I said earlier that Killian looks out over all the people from that rooftop and has an absolutely nonsensical epiphany that somehow sustains him for the next 12 years until Tony comes back into the picture during the events of this movie? Well, now's the time to examine said epiphany. Killian tells Tony that on the night they met in Switzerland, he waited on the rooftop for 20 minutes before spending the next hour thinking about jumping.
I had a thought that would guide me for years to come.
Anonymity, Tony.
He then gets Maya to acknowledge the fact that anonymity has become his mantra for the past 12 years, to which she replies with a totally convincing affirmation. So when a famous billionaire blew you off at a convention by leaving you on a rooftop, you, an intellectual, looked down at all the people beneath you, gathered that they couldn't see you, realized that this meant that you were anonymous, and decided that that one idea would motivate your actions from that point onwards and carry you until you could achieve your ultimate goal? Let's pause for a moment, loyal viewer. I'd like you to ask yourself one very simple question. How does that rooftop epiphany relate to what Killian is doing at this very moment in the movie? Don't worry, it was a rhetorical question because I know you sure as hell don't remember. I didn't even remember Killian's motivation, and I just watched Iron Man 3 before Endgame came out. I watched the movie again while making notes for this video, and I still couldn't remember what his motivations were. Only while scripting this very section of the critique was my attention fully brought to how ridiculous this connection is.
You simply rule from behind the scenes. Because the second you give evil a face, you hand the people a target.
I guess they just ran out of room in the script to give Killian any semblance of a convincing character arc. I mean, Iron Man 3 is filled to the brim with impactful and well-developed characters, so on the one hand, I get it. But on the other hand, this villain's motivations are so paper-thin that it's as if he doesn't have any life outside of what Tony did to him over a decade ago. Tony burned him in Switzerland. Killian felt then and there that anonymity was somehow the singular idea that would sustain him for the rest of his life, and so he fabricated a warlord threat in order to give the public a target while heading illegal biotech research in the background. Where to begin with this pile of crap? Killian manufactured a terrorist where there did not need to be one. Killian is the real villain of the story, and he does his illegal work through AIM. So while Killian is hard at work trying to perfect extremis in order to eventually sell it, he creates the facade of the Mandarin to divert attention away from his criminal activities. I don't know if you've heard of it, but there's this great little piece also from the MCU. It's called Captain America the Winter Soldier. Why do I mention it? Because what Killian is revealed to have done in Iron Man 3 would be like Hydra in The Winter Soldier, infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D., and then instead of laying low until it's too late for anyone to stop them, manufacturing a false threat for Captain America to invest his attention and effort into. If Hydra had used some of their own resources to fabricate a target for Captain America to pursue, that would only serve to increase the likelihood that the good guys would catch on to their super secret scheme, which is exactly what happens in Iron Man 3. Happy tails the shady dude to the Chinese theater, where he gets blown up. Tony has ample reason to believe that Happy was a victim of a Mandarin attack, and so directly challenges the Mandarin and reveals his home address, something that could not have been anticipated. Killian's forces then destroy Tony's house and believe him to be dead. Tony commits to seeing his business with the Mandarin through, and then, with the benefit of everyone believing him to be dead, gathers information that apparently only he has access to, learns of AIM's involvement with the Mandarin, infiltrates the Mandarin's lair, and discovers him to be a false threat. From this point in the story, Tony gets his suit back, teams up with Rhodey, and goes on to foil Killian's evil scheme. Now, let's try to imagine a version of the story with no false threat. Early in the story, Happy is hospitalized at the Chinese theater. When Tony leaves the hospital, he has nobody to directly challenge, so revealing his home address would make even less sense than it did when there was a target at which he could aim his rage. With no available information, Tony does some digging and plots the flight path to Tennessee to investigate the only other explosion with a similar temperature to the one that hit Happy. At this point, neither Maya showing up at his house or the helicopter attack could take place because Tony didn't give up his address, theoretically. So he investigates the site of the explosion in Tennessee and hits a dead end. There is no Mandarin to broadcast public threats, so there is no signal for Tony to trace and lead him to the Mandarin's lair, and therefore he couldn't learn that Killian was responsible for the extremist-related attacks. Do you see what this means? By fabricating a target for the public to focus their attention on, Killian has facilitated the means by which someone with enough resources could foil his entire plan. Killian creating the Mandarin for the sake of anonymity directly led to his involvement with illegal human experiments being discovered and ended. Not only is Killian's motivation paper thin, it's counterproductive. This man stood on a rooftop and thought to himself that the best way to get his Kickstarter off the ground would be to invent a terrorist that operated out of the same building as he did to take people's attention off of his own criminal business. At least Hydra had the brains to keep their activities secret. Nobody found out about Hydra until it was almost too late to stop them, and even then, Hydra was only found out because they got sloppy and made their actions more pronounced. If they had killed Nick Fury discreetly instead of leading him through a citywide car chase, then maybe Cap never would have gotten the USB that led to him discovering Hydra was still around and thwarting their evil scheme. This same damn thing happens in Spider-Man Homecoming with the Vulture's crew. They remain completely under the radar for years, until some of the crew get arrogant, leading to their defeat. The moral of the story is laying low is vastly preferable to announcing your crime and infinitely better than telegraphing it. Not only did Killian announce his crimes, which he committed vicariously through the Mandarin, he invented the Mandarin to be a diversion away from his actual business with AIM and Extremis, while telegraphing that the Mandarin was a real threat to millions of people around the world, effectively giving them a route to find his base of operations and subsequently prevent him from completing his work. My dude's plan makes no sense from any which way you look at it. We aren't even done with this scene, but I'm going to jump ahead here as I did with Maya for the sake of giving you the whole picture. Killian has a few more lines outlining his motivations and intentions. He says,
"This time tomorrow, I'll have the West's most powerful leader in one hand and the world's most feared terrorist in the other. I'll own the war on terror, create supply and demand for you, for your brothers and sisters."
Brothers and sisters, of course, referring to the veterans who he's recruited into the Extremis experiments. This is actually some pretty sound reasoning. By manufacturing war while controlling both sides of the conflict, you only stand to profit as long as the war goes on. Killian planned to achieve this by executing President Ellis, thus shifting power to the Veep, who is safely secure in his pocket. With Killian in control of the President of the United States and the Mandarin, he would be funding and profiting from both sides of the war on terror. I can't fault the writers for anything regarding this particular motivation of Killian's. It's how he got here that boggles my mind. Back to the scene at hand. Killian, like Maya, wants Tony to help them finish the formula to make Extremis stable so that they can ship product ASAP. In the motel scene, Maya explicitly says that before, Tony had no incentive to help them with the formula, but now that they have Pepper, Tony has been given reason. So, Killian offers up Pepper as a bargaining chip to help motivate Tony to get to work. I'm getting tired of saying this, but there is so much wrong with this scene. Killian outright says that Pepper has been injected with Extremis and that her body is currently choosing whether to accept the formula or just give up. As for the moment, she is experiencing nothing but pain. So you'd think that this would give Tony ample incentive to get to work on that solution. But if you turn your brain on for a moment, or rather, use your ears, you would have just heard Killian say that at this point in time, Pepper is capable of either successfully bonding with Extremis or dropping dead. Every discussion regarding Extremis in the movie leads us to believe that it is a binary set of outcomes. Either the subject merges with the formula and becomes superhuman, or just dies. Killian is the head of AIM and has one of the best understandings of the drug of anyone in this movie, and yet he acts in this scene as though Tony solving the formula would have any effect on whether or not Pepper survives after just having told Tony that she has an equal chance of living or dying. This only gets worse when just before the climax, Killian admits to Pepper that she is present in the harbor as his trophy. If he wanted her present for the culmination of all his hard work, then why the hell did he inject her with a serum that had a 50% chance of killing her? Whose fault is it that the characters in this movie are so stupid? The writers? The director? I wouldn't be so eager to play the blame game if it wasn't for the movie treating its audience like a bunch of brain-dead toddlers. Iron Man 3 does not want you to think any harder than you need to in order to enjoy the figurative keys constantly being jingled in front of your face. And we're still not even done addressing Killian's actions in this scene alone. He threatens Tony with Pepper's life, which isn't in either of their hands at this point, and from what we can gather, Tony is sufficiently motivated to solve the formula. So what does Killian do after encouraging Tony to finish the formula? He leaves Maya's corpse on the floor and calmly exits the room. In order for Tony to finish the formula, he either needs a desk at which he can write down the solution, or he needs a couple of dudes to hold a pen and paper while he verbally tells them what to write down. And what do we get instead? Tony, zip-tied to the bed, and two guards watching him with their thumbs up their asses. Why doesn't Killian actually put Tony to work on the Extremis formula? Probably so that we can have this gag.
Trust me, you're gonna be in a puddle of blood on the ground in 5, 4, 3, come on!
Meanwhile, they took Rhodey captive in the Iron Patriot armor and are now trying to get him out. Keep in mind, right? AIM is a privately funded think tank, implying that they have brains at their disposal. AIM was also the organization who handled the Iron Patriot rebrand, and during all the time that this think tank had access to this highly advanced suit of armor, they didn't think to or were not capable of putting in place some type of override switch. I mean, it's not like they needed it. Luring Rhodey into a Pakistani trap was no problem for them. The issue with this whole scene is that it's clunky. This scene exists to tell the audience how Rhodey ended up in Killian's possession. He flew to the rescue of some sweatshop workers or something, got manhandled by an Extremis soldier, and the suit just bugged out because I guess it doesn't have basic temperature control. It's not made clear what just happened to Rhodey, but my point is that if AIM had the suit in their possession for long enough to give it a paint job, then surely they could have put in a virus that, when activated, would automatically fly Rhodey to their secret base in Miami, where it would then spit him out, or better yet, the virus could make the suit spit Rhodey out and then fly itself to the Mandarin's lair. Oh right, Rhodey and Tony need to meet each other in this scene for the plot to advance. Forgot about that.
This is the Mandarin?
I know, it's embarrassing.
As it turns out, while Tony was infiltrating the Mandarin's lair, the Mark 42 was charging. Unbeknown to the audience, as last we heard, the power source was insufficient. We get treated to this gag as the suit parts are being held back by a wooden door, so Tony will have to think outside the box one more time, albeit with a fraction of the Iron Man suit at his disposal. After the baddies got Rhodey out of the Iron Patriot armor, they gave him a firm shove and left him lying on the floor of their evil lair instead of killing or capturing him, meaning that him and Tony can team up for the climax.
You tell him where Pepper is and he'll stop doing it.
Doing what?
Oh, I get it. Ow, that hurt.
What's in it for me?
He'll stop doing it.
Doing what?
Tony and Rhodey hijack Trevor's speedboat and call up the Veep to warn him that the Iron Patriot is a Trojan horse. The Veep hears their warning and ignores it because, as previously mentioned, he is Killian's new political patron. The Iron Trojan meets the president before he gets on Air Force One, and nobody bothers to do a voice check. The Trojan passes as the real deal for quite some time, all while remaining dead quiet. President Ellis's security detail is abysmal. There are no two ways about it. If they can't even stop a blatant security breach such as this one, then the president deserves to be kidnapped. Here's the real kicker. If Rhodey is the only person who uses the Iron Patriot armor, then why is it allowing the Extremis soldier to operate it? We've been shown that the Iron Man suits have retinal scanning potential in this same movie. Did this armor ever have a lock? And if so, how did AIM bypass it? We're shown that AIM has the ability to control the armor remotely, as we see the president being flown away in the suit, and we have to assume they gained this control off screen. But wait! AIM did add a remote control feature to the Iron Patriot suit. When? They must have done it between the time they got Rhodey out of it and when it showed up at Air Force One. If not, then why didn't they just use the remote control feature to steal the suit instead of kidnapping Rhodey and taking all the time and effort to force him out? Because they needed him to meet up with Tony at the lair. Okay, then why did AIM have anything to do with the rebrand? To lead the audience and characters to be suspicious of them, of course. So let's get this straight. AIM had the War Machine armor for who knows how long in order to give it a makeover, intending to use it at some point in the near future to kidnap the president, but did not put in place the feature necessary to meeting that end, instead opting to forcefully take the Iron Patriot captive, occupant inside, and then, after and only after torturing the wearer out, put in an override switch that would allow them to control the suit remotely. And we're still not done. On the boat, Rhodey tells Tony that they can only save Pepper or the president, not both. This throwaway line is all we get to inform us as to how Tony is approaching Pepper's hostage situation. If you miss this line, which is highly likely, you would not know that Tony had any intention of rescuing Pepper ahead of what happens in the climax. This line is so easily missed as, immediately after it, comes another throwaway line telling us that the cellar doors at Tony's house are finally being cleared. This single line is the only justification we are given as to why Tony's Iron Army could not appear before the climactic battle. They were stuck under rubble or something. Meanwhile, the Iron Trojan has successfully infiltrated Air Force One and sent the president back to base in the Iron Patriot armor. The Mark 42 makes it to the plane in time for Tony to kill the extremist soldier and pull off a daring mid-air rescue of the remaining Air Force One staff. This action set piece is thrilling and thoroughly entertaining. Once more, it's a shame that such a good action sequence takes place in such a dreadful film. By the way, Tony was safe the whole time. Boom, big reveal. Tony asks Jarvis if it's time for the house party protocol, after which we are treated to a shot of the Iron Army activating and preparing to strut their stuff for the climax. Fast forward a bit, and Tony and Rhodey have made it to the ship where the extremist goons start laying down fire on them. Thankfully, no MCU movie would be complete without some degree of plot armor, so Tony's Iron Army arrives just in time to save our two protagonists and make for a pretty neat entrance. My favorite of the armors is Igor. He's got a hunchback and everything. When Tony finally climbs into a suit, Rhodey inquires as to how he might come by one in this time of heightened adrenaline and raised stakes. To which Tony replies,
"Oh, I'm sorry, they're only coded to me."
So, when Tony sent the Mark 42 onto Pepper during the destruction of his house, was it only coded to him then as well? If so, then clearly all he has to do is remotely attach one of the suits to Rhodey and bingo. But Rhodey had his own suit. Yes, it wasn't exactly an Iron Man suit, but surely Tony would allow Rhodey some type of access to his arsenal of armors. Since Rhodey isn't assigned a suit in this scene, and Tony doesn't even try to gift him one, we can only assume that this is because Rhodey is blind. Jarvis locates Pepper, who, because of the mayhem caused by the Iron Army's scuffle with the extremist goons, is sitting pretty under some debris. Meanwhile, Rhodey performs a daring rescue of the president.
Mr. President! Just hold on, alright? I'm coming. Just hold on. Hold on.
By somehow activating a repulsor blast from the outside of the suit, puts on the Iron Patriot armor, and then evacuates the president. At this point, it would be really nice of Rhodey to leave the president somewhere safe and return to help Tony save Pepper, but he doesn't do that. He just leaves. Tony promises to catch Pepper and proceeds to break his promise immediately after. The climax is now in full swing. Tony believes Pepper is dead and so takes out his rage on Killian for what is admittedly quite an entertaining fight. The Mark 42 comes back from the bridge only to break up on entry, allowing for Tony to assemble the prototype suit around Killian. He then blows the suit, delivering what we think to be the coup de grace, when in actuality that explosion was not enough to finish off Killian. So microwaving dog tags in the same room as a gas leak was enough to cause an explosion capable of killing a person with the extremist formula in them earlier in the movie, but the detonation of a multi-billion-dollar Iron Man suit is not enough to kill the same type of enemy now. Instead, Pepper gets to come in last second, displaying skills she never has before and murder Killian with another, somehow more potent explosion. Well, color my expectations subverted. I never could have called Pepper coming in and saving the day like a badass. She was jumping and flipping and kicking and shooting. I've never seen her do that before. In fact, she just killed a man. This is the first person she's ever killed on screen, and probably the first she's ever killed in her life. I'm eager to see how this grave action will take effect on her psyche.
Oh my god. That was really violent.
Overall, this twist surprised me, and that means it's inherently a good. Moving on.
Screwed, it's Christmas.
Tony then proceeds to blow up all of his suits in a celebratory fireworks display. I'm running out of steam, but I feel like I need to at least briefly cover why this is asinine. Tony spent months building these suits, as a mean to help him ease his insomnia. These suits had just helped him win the day. He would not have fared nearly as well as he did without the help of the Iron Army, and the moment he believes the threat is no more, he turns the suits into fireworks. What if another challenger shows up? What if any kind of threat rears its head between now and when Tony has a new suit ready and working? Why even build in a protocol that makes all of your super suits explode simultaneously if they had any value in the first place? Does Tony have a genuine connection to his suits, or are they just toys capable of amusing him in any way he pleases? The Clean Slate Protocol is meant to be the cherry on top of the cake that is this movie or this climactic battle, but it does not achieve that goal. The destruction of Tony's suits is supposed to evoke feelings of joy and satisfaction, but if you're committing the heinous crime of thinking while watching Iron Man 3, then this moment comes off as bewildering and nonsensical.
And so, as Christmas morning began, my journey had reached its end.
No, it hasn't. You make 5 more major appearances in the MCU. Who wrote this? This speech is supposed to register as a heartfelt conclusion to Iron Man's saga, but it just ends up being a ham-fisted way to remind us of the movie's themes and a false ending for the character of Tony Stark.
You can take away my house, all my tricks and toys.
Nobody took away your tricks and toys. You were denied access to them by circumstances beyond your control until the end of the movie, and then you yourself blew them up in celebration. Tony's narration coincides with a scene of him walking around the site of his destroyed house and tossing the electromagnet that used to be in his chest into the ocean. This whole scene leads us to believe that Tony is moving on from being Iron Man. He gets surgery to remove the shrapnel from his chest. We could interpret this as Tony ridding himself of the burden of Iron Man once and for all. He throws his chest piece into the ocean where the remnants of his destroyed house and lab lay. This could symbolize Tony throwing away his attachment to the Iron Man title so that he can finally move on, get over his trauma, and have a normal life.
My armor? It was never a distraction or a hobby. It was a cocoon. And now, I'm a changed man.
This entire scene serves to tell us that Tony has grown and developed and is moving on to something, but what that is left unanswered. Intentionally, I assume. This movie is the conclusion to the Iron Man trilogy, and so this scene is likely meant to act as the bow that wraps up the films nicely, but it is so vague that I can only guess they had no idea how exactly they wanted to end this character's story, and wanted to leave room for future entries in the MCU to play around with Iron Man some more. Speaking of which, let's see what the future MCU has to say about the character after the events of Iron Man 3.
A few years ago, I almost lost her, so I trashed all my suits. Then we had to mop up Hydra, and then Ultron. And then, I never stopped. Because the truth is, I don't want to stop.
Yeah, that's it. That's the only lip service Iron Man 3 is given in the rest of the MCU. Testament to how vacuous of an addition it was. Throughout the rest of the MCU, Tony does not display such comical signs of PTSD as he does in Iron Man 3. Instead, his handlers in future films opted to make Tony paranoid, overprotective, and guilt-ridden. These dimensions were added for reasons relevant to the plots of both Captain America Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming, but seem to unintentionally serve as a redemption of Tony's character. The MCU fixed the brunt of the mistakes that Iron Man 3 inflicted upon Tony's character. Thankfully.
Check way too small. When we pull up, give me the cash.
Give me the cash.
Remember how I said that this is the plot twist that had the fan base divided down the middle? Well, I don't think it's down the middle exactly. I'd say there are 3 main camps of people with differing takes on the Mandarin. Those who enjoy the twist and appreciate the departure from the source material, those who detest the change and feel it's disrespectful to the source material, and those who are mostly indifferent to Iron Man 3's portrayal of the Mandarin. Just for the sake of transparency, my opinion of this version of the Mandarin is one of mixed feelings. I do detest what they did with the character. I feel that Iron Man 3 butchered the Mandarin and did the source material a massive disservice. On the other hand, I love Ben Kingsley's portrayal of a bumbling, washed-up actor who's in over his head. Ben Kingsley is one of the best parts of this mediocre film. He steals every scene he's in, whether he's the enigmatic and imposing Mandarin or the goofy and pathetic Trevor Slattery. Most of the genuine laughs I got out of this movie were during the plot twist scene when Tony first meets him. So personally, I both love and hate the Mandarin in Iron Man 3. Love him for Ben Kingsley and hate him for the departure from the comics. But let's go further into that because the Mandarin's execution in Iron Man 3 brings up some very interesting topics to do with movies and adaptations of other mediums of storytelling. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is heavily based on and inspired by Marvel Comics at large. The MCU borrows whatever it wants from whichever continuity or alternate universe it pleases. In many cases, the MCU has been successful when taking liberties with the source material. The initial Avengers roster, Hydra having infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D., the Mark 42 prehensile armor, Vulture being a product of the Battle of New York, and the Eye of Agamotto being an Infinity Stone are all inventions of the MCU. As far as I know, I'm not 100% sure, feel free to correct me in the comments. These are, to the best of my knowledge, all liberties that the MCU took with the source material and were executed well. These are changes and deviations that people behind the scenes incorporated well into the movies. Sadly, however, they do not have a perfect track record. The Iron Patriot armor, the Mandarin, and the Extremis formula are all aspects of Iron Man 3 with which the story took large liberties with less than favorable results. But does that make this a bad movie? For some of you, the answer is obviously yes, and others the answer obviously no. This discussion will go on until the end of time because it does not only revolve around Iron Man 3. This is the discussion regarding film quality and adaptation quality. There is a difference, and it deserves to be spoken about. As it's based on comics and takes place within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Iron Man 3 is an adaptation. Or is it? If so, then Iron Man 3 is a horrific attempt at an adaptation, considering that Tony doesn't get a dose of the Extremis formula, the Iron Patriot isn't Norman Osborn, and the Mandarin isn't a wizard. These aspects of the source material are not paid their due adaptive respects in Iron Man 3, so we can say without a doubt that it is a bad adaptation. That is, if it was even trying to be. Which it wasn't. None of the movies within the MCU are adaptations. While they do borrow characters, events, and ideas from the comics, they do so just as an alternate universe in the comics would, which is totally appropriate considering that the MCU is an alternate universe. While the mainline comics take place on and around Earth 616, the MCU is set on Earth 199999. This is canon, by the way, I did my research. So if you make the argument that the Mandarin's depiction in Iron Man 3 is a butchering of the character, that argument doesn't hold much water, as this is just one version of the Mandarin, not based directly on Earth 616's Mandarin. The MCU opted to make the Mandarin a warlord instead of a wizard, and set up his terrorist organization as early as Iron Man 1. As far as successfully taking liberties goes, the MCU did it well, up until this scene. Furthermore, Killian goes on to declare, quite definitively, that he is the Mandarin. We could make the argument that this is a point against the movie because it's unfaithful to the source material if it was actually an adaptation. But Lumo, what about the— Yes, I'll talk about the fucking one-shot. With the Iron Man 3 Blu-ray came the short film All Hail the King, which sees Trevor incarcerated, serving time for his role in Killian's schemes. All this one-shot really achieves is giving Ben Kingsley more screen time to not take anything seriously. And it totally retcons everything about the Mandarin as established in Iron Man 3. During an interview with an alleged journalist, the interview goes sideways when the interviewer busts out a gun hidden in his camera and threatens Trevor for appropriating the Mandarin title. At this point in time, Exposition Guy tells us that the Mandarin is real and not happy that his name was stolen for use by a washed-up actor in a poorly planned and orchestrated conspiracy. That last part about the poorly planned and orchestrated conspiracy wasn't actually part of their dialogue. I just added it because I don't feel that I've paid enough lip service to how moronic that plan was, but anyway. This short film is canon and so establishes that the Mandarin is a character separate from what we have so far been exposed to in Iron Man 3. Trevor was involved with AIM this whole time, and Iron Man 1 establishes that the Ten Rings is a legitimate terror group, so this retcon isn't entirely contrived. It just would have been nice if it was in the actual movie instead of sidelined to a Blu-ray extra. With a Shang-Chi movie in the works and the Ten Rings apparently playing a large role in that movie, it won't be long before we see the continuation of the Mandarin's role in the MCU. And that is all the time I'm willing to dedicate to the one-shot. This is a critique of Iron Man 3. Of course, Iron Man is one inhabitant of a shared universe, and so it would be foolish not to occasionally mention the greater universe. But the one-shot only exists to remedy a problem that Iron Man 3 invented. If Iron Man 3 were logically consistent or at all decent as a movie, then this short wouldn't need to exist. Anyway, I mentioned it, you can't say I didn't, I have proof. Back to your regularly scheduled programming. On the other hand, Iron Man 3 is a film, and this video is a critique, which is why I haven't based any of my criticism of this movie on its merits as an adaptation up until this section. So now that we have the adaptation argument out of the way, let's talk about the character of the Mandarin with regards to Iron Man 3 as a movie and nothing else. The Mandarin is revealed early on in the movie as an intimidating and mysterious villain who works from the shadows orchestrating worldwide acts of terror. We are not given any reason to doubt that he is a megalomaniac until the scene in which he shoots the Roxxon exec. Then comes Tony's infiltration of the Miami base, and the Mandarin turns out to be nothing more than a front for Killian's illegal human experiments. As far as subverting the audience's expectations go, this twist leaves much to be desired. The villain we were exposed to for the first half of the movie was so much more compelling and interesting than Trevor Slattery or Aldrich Killian. Yes, the plot twist is surprising, but it's not at all satisfying to all the viewers who invested themselves in this character. And this twist doesn't just fall flat on an emotional level, it's not logically satisfying either. Keep in mind, the whole reason Trevor is even in this position is because Killian had a mood on a rooftop 12 years ago and had the idiotic idea to unnecessarily manufacture a warlord target. Trevor isn't seen until the denouement, and in his absence, Killian takes the title of Mandarin for himself. Nothing about how the Mandarin is handled in this film serves to sate the audience, whether they be die-hard comic fans, die-hard film fans, or casual moviegoers. The Mandarin is at his best when Trevor is acting and the audience doesn't know any better. What does that say for the director and writers? They are evidently so out of touch with what viewers appreciate they don't even know how to execute a logically consistent, emotionally gratifying plot twist. Of course, there are those who will defend Iron Man 3 and the Mandarin twist to the death, possibly on the basis that because they enjoyed it, it has some semblance of value. All I'm saying is, there are two sides of me in this discussion. The film critic in me, who looks at movies through the lens of objective quality, which is heavily governed by internal logic and consistency, and then the superhero fan in me, who looks at movies through the lens of fan service and respect for the source material namely. I have given considerable effort to scrutinizing Iron Man 3, and come to the conclusion that it is a lackluster film and disrespectful to its source material, and I've made my reasoning quite clear. If you watch this movie and come to the conclusion that not only is it good, but that the Mandarin plot twist is logically satisfying, then I'm afraid helping you is beyond me, and I'd much rather prefer to leave you to your delusions while I enjoy some objectively good cinema.
Head me out like a light, like a light,
Iron Man 3 stands as the most divisive movie in the MCU for one central reason: the Mandarin plot twist. Now, it's not exactly easy to pinpoint which creative decision was the worst in this movie. There are so many screw-ups to choose from. AIM giving the Iron Patriot armor a redesign but not putting an override switch in place. Tony giving his address to a terrorist after stating how badly he wanted to protect the only person who lives with him. Maya not contacting Tony for 12 years for help on the cure to cancer. Killian's utterly insane rooftop epiphany. Tony giving a child a grenade for use against another child. Killian's utterly idiotic master plan. The bad guys leaving Rhodey alive to fight another day. Tony using a not yet combat-ready prototype suit to defend his house from a terrorist. Killian using Pepper as leverage despite having no control over whether she lives or dies. Everything to do with Tony's PTSD. Pepper pulling this acrobatic routine out of her ass despite her total aversion to combat leading up to this point. Tony never contacting the Avengers or S.H.I.E.L.D. Maya Hansen. Tony not using his arsenal of suits to defend his home from the Mandarin and then destroying them after their first outing. Every instance of tonal inconsistency. Every instance of a major plot contrivance. Every instance of extreme convenience. And of course, the Mandarin. Iron Man 3 is a heap of mistakes. But to be fair, it does have its pros. The Mark 42 is a great concept, and what time it gets to showcase its creative capacity is admirable within the scope of Iron Man 3, but with regards to the greater MCU, it is total wasted potential. Ben Kingsley's acting is exactly what you'd expect from such a high-caliber performer. The tragedy is that he wasn't used as the movie's actual villain, but a bad punchline instead. It's not that his execution of jokes is flawed, it's that the context in which his brilliant acting takes place is a sad mix of confusion and disappointment. Iron Man 3 is the first entry in the MCU following the Avengers, but features no prominent connections to the world in which it takes place, a regretful side effect of a standalone film taking place within a shared universe. This movie had so much potential, namely Ben Kingsley's Mandarin and the prehensile armor, but Shane Black decided to, instead of making a tonally consistent, rational, and compelling villain, take the route of subverting the audience's expectations at the expense of quality. It's not like the Mandarin twist was incapable of being good, it just wasn't. And art should be judged on what it achieved, not what it intended. Iron Man 3 will forever be known as the movie that ruined the Mandarin, turned trauma into a joke, and had all the suits at the end. That is what this movie accomplished. That is how it will be remembered. What's interesting is that the majority of people out there will look back at Iron Man 3 with either fondness or animosity for similar reasons. I've heard a great many people say that they hate the film for what it did to the Mandarin, and a great deal of others say that that is the reason they love it. Not to mention the people who enjoy the movie with total apathy for its controversy. This is all testament to how divisive of a film Iron Man 3 is. But I don't much care for fence-sitting, so I'm going to throw my hat into the ring and say that Iron Man 3 is a dreadful, horrendous, no good, downright catastrophic excuse of a summer blockbuster. This movie is appalling, and I have spared no expense in bolstering that argument with this critique. You're more than welcome to enjoy this train wreck. You already know my stance on enjoyability, but if you're going to argue that Iron Man 3 is of any realistic value as a film, and you have watched it with your brain turned on while thinking about what's happening, then I'm sorry, but there's no helping you. But Lumo, the themes. Tony says he creates his own demons in the opening. We then see him create his own demons, and then they nearly kill him. And Tony left Killian on the rooftop with nothing but desperation, and Killian then returned that desperation to Tony by torturing Pepper. It's all cyclical, don't you see? All I see is a movie intent on committing a character assassination on the MCU's flagship character with so little self-awareness that it couldn't see how people would possibly react negatively to a nonsensical plot and an unfaithful representation of the subject matter. Iron Man 3 is disgusting. The characters are all retarded, the narrative is mindless, and its impact on the MCU is so negligible that you need not remember it exists. Probably what Kevin Feige wants. There we have it. That's my critique of what I consider to be the most divisive movie in the MCU. As always, I love discussion and debate, so if you have any criticism of my criticism of Iron Man 3, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time.